My goal is not necessarily I want to have an exit. That's inherently in me just because I'm a competitive person. But I think right now, if I can help people flourish, I will be rewarded for it. Eventually, that will be a bigger outcome for the stakeholders, for the shareholders, and for my family.
Welcome back to the Inorganic Podcast. My name's Christian Hasselt. I'm your host, and this is episode 15. Why is episode 15 awesome? Well, I'm told by a lot of friends of mine that when you get to episode 30, you really start to see a little bit more listener and viewer traction. We have a really great audience on YouTube. We have a smaller audience on Apple and Spotify podcasts. We're hoping to make it a larger audience. My friends tell me that when you get to 30, you really start seeing the traction. So I'm halfway there at 15, and I'm excited to be there. Today, what we're going to do is have a conversation with a founder that I've known for nearly a decade. He has built not one, not two, but he's been a part of the building of 3 companies as a co-founder. Number one was the Prospershow, which is a very well recognized show in the e-commerce space that was acquired by Emerald Expositions. He was one of the founders of Seller's Choice, which was acquired by Jurek Media. And he was a co-founder of Skubana, which was purchased by a 3PL about 2 years ago. And I wanted to bring him on to just talk about sort of the journey of what I would call being sort of a serial founder and exiter, and to also have a little bit of a philosophical conversation about sort of the mind of a founder CEO who's kind of been through the journey where he was sort of a bachelor and living, had a lot of flexibility in his life because he didn't have a family, and now transitioning to where he's the founder of another company, Profasee, where he's got a family and he's got a lot of other responsibilities, and just talking a lot about balancing those responsibilities. We are also in this episode going to go a little bit into the mind of like, how do you know it was the right time to sell? What were the dynamics of the sale process? So really kind of delivering on what we like to talk about in this podcast, which is a bit about the ins and outs of the M&A process in enterprise SaaS companies. So with me today for this episode is Chad Rubin. Chad, welcome. It's great to have you on. Thanks so much for joining. Why don't we start by giving my listeners a little bit of background on yourself?
Background, 20 years in e-com, building and trying to leave the ecosystem better than how I found it. So I've got 3 exits, and I'm running 2 businesses in parallel currently. Biggest exit was Skubana, software company, but also co-founded a conference in the e-commerce space. But today, what's running is I have an e-commerce business. We manufacture vacuum filters, coffee filters. It's called Think Crucial. And I'm building from the ground up Profasee, which is a dynamic pricing software for e-commerce brands.
And we're going to talk about Profasee as well as Skubana. But I think the thing that I would, outside looking in, you, Chad Rubin, are a part of what I call the e-commerce mafia. And that mafia is a group of really scrappy founders who identify these real pains in commerce. They experience those pains directly by like actually doing the work, and then build companies around them. And you've built multiple companies this way. You built Skubana this way. I'm very interested to hear about Profasee and kind of how you got to the realization of Profasee to the extent you're willing to share. But what I'd also like to do for the listeners today is walk them through a bit of your journey of not only building the company, but how you kind of reached the conclusion of when was the right time to sell and what that sale experience was like, so the listeners can have a sense from their own perspective what that experience is. So maybe I think the first thing I want to do in just starting the conversation is, the frame of, at the end of the day, we're building a business. What is your formula for building a business? When you're starting, when you're starting out, what is like sort of the problem that you're trying to solve, but also how are you thinking about at the end, like, how do I make this a great win for me, Chad Rubin, at the end?
Yeah. And by the way, I just want to say that my thinking on starting businesses have evolved over time. And I would say early on, it was all about solving a problem that I experienced. So the reason I started making vacuum filters and coffee filters and selling direct to consumer was, one, nobody was doing it. Amazon had just started their marketplace and allowed people to start selling on the marketplace. And then you saw these crop ups of Warby Parker and Chubbies, as an example, movement watches. And I wanted to capitalize on the movement towards direct to consumer. So I guess the inception was, hey, I found a problem. My parents owned a vacuum store. They were struggling. How do we make our own product and bring it to market and just sort of replicate the success of other D2C brands in a different space? So then you move on and you're like, oh, now since I'm running a multi-channel business, I'm selling on Amazon, I'm selling on Walmart, I'm selling on Magento at the time. Before that was Volusion. I'm dating myself now. And
Whoa.
and now it's on Shopify. But I'm a multi-channel seller, and there was really no softwares out there that was really can handle such a high order volume that we were running. So then there was another problem to solve, and that was really my first software company, which was Skubana. So we really were dog fooding and creating a solution for the pain that we experienced. And then you can say the same thing for Prospershow. There was no community. Like Amazon was, I think you called it e-commerce mafia, but like there's like renegades. Like there was no tethering of people. There's no tapestry weaving people together around a community on Amazon. And we're like, okay, we can build a huge conference. And we did. And we eventually sold that to Emerald in 2018. And the same thing with Profasee, starting all over again, solving a problem that I experienced while I'm actually building my D2C business.
That's great background. Like, when you're building these businesses, like it's very clear that there is a personal experience and there's a business motivation. Do you think about the end? Do you think about, when you're getting started, are you thinking about how does this end or where does this go? Or are you more sort of mission driven and like wherever it leads me, it leads me? Like, how are you thinking about it? And especially you mentioned earlier, it's evolved. So obviously the first go around, my own experience was I just sort of did it and didn't really think about the end. And then the next time I was like, okay, now I'm going to think about the end a little bit more clearly because there are some things to optimize for. How did it evolve for you?
The e-commerce one, my e-commerce business, I was fired from my job on Wall Street. So that was quite easy. And like my parents were struggling. And so it just felt like a natural transition. For Skubana, for the software company, by the way, SaaS was still early back in 2013, 2014. It wasn't as mature as it is now. And so I would say that like I knew that there was something here and I knew that there was going to be an interesting outcome. And I was thinking about who those potential players could be in the outcome. And those players were not part of my outcome, which is super interesting. And then you fast forward to Profasee, I took all these mistakes that I made at Skubana and I built a framework and I was like, oh, okay. I was a co-founder. Now I want to be a founder for the first time. We built software that helped sellers become more efficient, but now how do I build software that helps people become more effective? How do I leverage AI in it? So there was interest there. And then now I'm making new mistakes. So I'm carving brand new mistakes I didn't even realize before. And this is more so in terms of like how large of an outcome can this become? Like I know that this is going to be a great outcome for me and my family, but can I do it again and can I double my previous outcome? So those questions are starting to arise as I'm building this new software company. But certainly like Prophecy, all the things that I built around it and the mistakes and those learnings became parts of a puzzle for me in building and framework around building the new company.
What are a couple of example, learnings from the Skubana experience that you're taking with you to Prophecy?
So Skubana, for those listening, Skubana is an operations platform. So we were multi-channel. We worked with Shopify and Amazon and Wayfair and Walmart, and we would juggle inventory cross-channel. So if you sell on Amazon, we update it on Shopify. We sell on Shopify, we update it on Wayfair. And of course, we had an app store, and we did a lot of really interesting things in the ecosystem. Like it wasn't just that. I'm really making it very elementary to just break it down. But one thing that's interesting is that this business is a cost item. It's an operation software. It lives on your P&L as a cost. In fact, it's actually probably one of the biggest cost items on your P&L as an e-commerce brand. So when I was thinking about my next thing, I said, you know what? I don't want to be in the cost. I don't want to be a cost center. I want to be profit center. I want to be in the revenue stream of a business. And so for me, pricing, right? Price times units equals your revenue. Pricing is a massive lever. So I guess it's a small door that's a small lever that swings big doors, right? It's essentially has a direct impact on the bottom line, and that makes it an easier sell, especially as I'm building an outbound team as well. So that's like one small, interesting example of, hey, we can sell this thing. We can build an outbound team around it. It helps sellers become more effective. And I built a rule and a framework around that in the actual business itself.
That's actually makes a ton of sense. Like e-commerce can be very unprofitable very fast if you're not careful. And, one of the things I think you're saying is your revenue model, if your revenue model is ultimately not directly tied to the success of your customer, then they will always look at you at renewal time and say, I need to look around and see if there's another option so I can save $2. And there's always somebody out there who's willing to sell them the same thing for $2 less, even if it is truly not the same thing.
100%. Especially there's a lot of noise in the inventory management, order management space online. And it's also gotten a lot easier. Like the moat around SaaS has gotten easier. And that's another learning is that if you look at the Shopify App Store, the commoditization of apps on the Shopify App Store is massive. And pricing pressure has been experienced over the past couple of years where you have a lot of offshore talent coming in and just copying apps. So I wanted to build something that had a moat. So here's another example is like a traditional software company has a front end and a back end team. And the J curve, right? It's sort of the cash outlay of the R&D capex that's required to get you to product market fit has always been pretty big. But in the AI world, you have to run two dev teams. You have to run both the front end back end team, and then you have your data science machine learning team, and you have your data pipeline engineer. And so it's double the cash outlay, which actually means that it's far superior of a moat of a position to protect you as other copycats come into the marketplace. So that was another interesting learning. And Profasee has two dev teams, and we have significant IP around this dynamic pricing engine that we built to maximize profit for e-commerce brands.
And so that's kind of a protectionary mechanism, not only for the business from a competition perspective, but a protectionary of the business sort of itself.
Yes, precisely.
Yeah. So I want to stay with Skubana for a hot minute. How many years was it from like start to the point where you started seriously exploring an exit?
So I think we slugged it out for 7 years. So 2015, we sold in 2021.
Yeah. And what point did you say, okay, this is the right time? One of the things that, us founders know is once you build something that is capturing share of market, is getting noticed, people are calling on you all the time and asking you whether you're ready to sell, and you make decisions about who you talk to and who you don't talk to. But at one point or another, you say, I'm actually going to seriously explore a sale here. At what point, what catalyzed you saying now was the right time?
Yeah, a lot of things. The biggest one was the fact that, so the pandemic specifically forced bricks to clicks. And there was a massive transition of shopping behavior that happened from retail brick and mortar stores to online. And our company was a beneficiary of that. We got very lucky with that transition. If you think about it, for example, we can help you connect to a 3PL in seconds. And Amazon shut down their warehouses, so people were forced to now do what's called fulfilled by merchant, FBM, which is just pretty much shipping out of your own warehouse. And we enabled people to do it, and we enabled them to do it really quickly. So that was one really large impetus trend, a macro trend that was happening in our favor. And then you have our competitors, or so-called competitors, in the space surrounding us were acquired. Stitch Labs, Trade Gecko. And so the acquisition behavior started increasing. More people started coming inbound more than ever. And we decided to run a process because of so much interest. We're like, you know what, let's just see what this thing is worth. And so that created tension in the process and tension in the deal and led us to a really fantastic outcome for both the stakeholders, the shareholders, and our families.
You said a few things there that actually are very interesting. First of all, I don't know the exact specifics of your exit, but I know that it was wildly more successful than Stitch Labs. And there's a funny sub story here that is worth a double click. Stitch Labs raised something like 25 or $30 million. And what happened was they were sold in an asset sale. That product today literally doesn't exist. The moment the company was acquired, it was gone. And the reason why I bring this up is you should never assume that taking on capital is a sure win. Or another way of putting it is if you're a founder building a bootstrap company against a fundamentally bootstrap company, I'm talking about friends and family, that's like one thing. But when you start taking on institutional capital, you should never assume as a founder CEO that just because you didn't take on mountains of capital, that you can't become a winner in the end. Capital can be a handicap if you don't know how to, if you don't have conviction on what you need to do. And Stitch Labs should have been a great company. It went sideways for a whole lot of reasons we won't get on here. But that I think was super fascinating. You actually sort of beat a company that was very well capitalized at a very similar game.
It's interesting because I think they raised roughly 30, I want to say in the 30, maybe more than that. I don't precisely know now. I know back then I knew, and I actually did look up competitors and understood how much they've raised, what was their raise ratio to their revenue ratio. And Skubana was the underdog. We bootstrapped it. We raised a pre-seed. We raised a seed round of $880,000 from my friends and family. This was in 2013. SaaS still wasn't really. People were like, "Wait, Chad, you're going to start a software company? Like what?" And so we raised 880, and then it wasn't until 2019. Right before the pandemic, we raised our first Series A of $5 million, which is a very small Series A. And so if you look at the capital raise, how much we raised, it was 5 plus the 880, 5.880, versus if you look at the competitors in the space, like Bright Pearl raised 60 million, I want to say, roughly at the time. Stitch maybe raised 40. And so we certainly were a fierce competitor for sure, and very scrappy.
So the second point that I wanted to get to was when you decided to sell, how did you decide to run the process? Did you use a banker? Did you do it yourself? Like, how'd you run it?
So, offers came in that were unsolicited. And so those offers, I had a fiduciary responsibility to share those with our investors. And we essentially, I have a mentor in the space who really guides me. And he was like, hey, he's a CFO. And we all collectively said, hey, you know what? Let's just explore these things. It's a great time. The market is super hot right now. There's sort of an arc to the market. And I knew it wasn't going to be here forever. And so he said, look, if you're going to do this, especially with so much money on the line, like you need a real banker. I'm not going to actually support you on this process at all unless you hire a banker. That was his direct feedback to me. And so I went out and found a banker. I definitely wasn't necessarily pleased with the banker that I had hired, but I don't know anybody that is, right? For the most part. So yeah, we hired a banker and we ran a process. We had a data room. It consumed a lot of time and a lot of energy, and we had to keep the momentum happening in the company while running a process at the same time.
Yeah, there are pros and cons to bankers, but I think an important nuance here is to sell a business actually requires a license, a securities license. You're selling a security. When you're selling stock, you're selling a security. So you actually, I don't know whether your CFO advisor would have known this, but you don't really want to get involved in brokering the sale of a business because you carry a lot of liability in that process, especially depending on the sponsors that are acquiring. So there are merits to having them. And I think for as much as people say bankers are not always feeling like they're your best partner, the one thing they do is they force a process, they force decision making, and they do take a lot of weight off your shoulders in terms of dealing with a lot of the filtering out the people who should be in the process and not in the process. So ultimately, you run a process. Did you round down to like one kind of clear winner, or like did you have choices? How did it work out?
We had choices. Like we rounded down to a handful, and then we went with a dedicated effort with one through the process.
Yeah. And what was like the key decision criteria through two lenses? One is Chad Rubin, the CEO, and Chad Rubin, the co-founder.
I don't know if I necessarily separate them into two different lenses. I'm always, because like, first of all, I had a lot of friends and family that were invested. And also, by the way, these employees had been at the company for 7 years since the beginning. So I wanted to make sure that everyone was going to have a successful outcome from this process. But like once you sell, right? Once you sell, then the weight of all of that disappears, and there's a new CEO in town, right? It's kind of like a new president takes over, and it's funny because the relationship between me and others changed because I was no longer this CEO anymore. There's a new player in town. I think that changed the dynamic quite a bit, which was an interesting one for sure. But yeah, I don't know if I separate those two lenses from CEO and co-founder.
Some do. Some do are like, I got an outcome, and some people, like you said, feel very accountable to their team and making sure that their team has success. And I think some choose to bifurcate. But at the end of the day, the choice you made to proceed with a specific party, like what was the one thing that made you say, this is the right home for my people? This is the right home for Skubana?
Well, first of all, I liked the vision of what was shared with me, and certainly the outcome was very positive. So I led with the economic impact and the outcome, and the vision, if it could be executed, was one that I can be down with and I thought was super fascinating and interesting.
And did you structure, like, was the deal structure something where some upside was left for you on the table post deal? Like you got, you basically got some stock in the company, or did you just do an all out sale?
It was an all out sale. I became an at-will employee post-acquisition.
Isn't that a relief?
Funny because, like, on one hand, it was a relief, but on the other hand, I was like looking for my net to jump back in to figure out my next thing. But yeah, there was a super big release and weight off my chest for sure to be like, okay, I did it. I like monetized this thing. I created something that was amazing. I was actually non-consensus. A lot of VCs didn't believe in us. A lot of investors didn't believe in us, and like I proved myself right, and it worked out.
End to end through the sale process to like post closing, and maybe you stayed on for a little while and you helped support the business and the integration, right?
Correct. Yes, so, I stayed on for a bit and then I left. I resigned October of 21.
So from the time you started the process till October 21, what's like the one or two Uber learnings that you would want to share with other founders that are contemplating the sale of their business?
The first thing is that it's called a life-changing event. It's a life-changing outcome. And I think the ironic thing is that like my life actually didn't change to a big degree. Sure, I had more money, right? It was definitely a big boy exit. I had a lot more money in the bank, but like it looks cool. It's still there, right? And over time, like it normalizes. You're like, okay, like it's there, great. Now what? I'm still the same human being. I'm still the same. I have my family. I didn't go out and change my lifestyle. I did buy myself a gift, but nothing else really changed in that way. And so then all the amazing people that you're working with post or before the exit for 7 years, for 8 years, like really grinding it out, suddenly they're now building new relationships. It's sort of like they're off to, it's like your kids go to college, or it's like I'm an empty nester. That's kind of how it felt a bit. Yeah, it's pretty awesome to see. I'm still in touch with a good amount of them and helping them, watching them, sharing information together, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
So I think one takeaway is like, hey, your life changes, but like it doesn't. And then you have to actually take hold of that. So like what I did was after the sale, I call it this great reset. I actually was like, okay, I can jump right back in. I can quit today and I can jump into something else right away, or I can hire a lot of coaches and become a better version of myself, like 1.1. And that's what I did. I hired a lot of coaches across hobbies I've been wanting to explore and just trying to just use other parts of my brain. So I feel like I've been deploying resources to people and to employees and to investors and working my butt off to like see this thing work. And yet a lot of times you forget yourself. And I don't want to say you, like me, I
Yeah.
definitely wasn't harvesting in that way and bringing in those resources back into my body. So I was like, okay, this is a great time to do this. So that's what I did. And I think that was a very, very worthwhile time period. I absolutely loved it and cherish it.
So you left Skubana with a win, and you knew that e-commerce was hard, and you knew that investors are extra sensitive to e-commerce companies, and yet you decided to start another e-commerce company.
Well, I started another e-commerce SaaS company.
Yes.
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 Correct. It's like a woman who gives birth. The birthing process, carrying the pregnancy is very hard. The birthing process is hard. You're left with this beautiful child, and then you forget all the pain associated with that. There's a disassociation of pain. And I'm going to have another kid. I'm going to have another kid. And yeah, that's really it. And I was like, I can do this again. Well, I'm also in a different place in my life. Have more, I have more, I've already succeeded. So I have a cushion, let's say. I also have a child in my life, which also changes things. It's not the same Chad Rubin from 2013 in my, I started this company in my 20s. I'm now in my upper 30s. I'm almost 40. I just turned 39. And so it comes with a whole new set of challenges, like not wanting to make trade-offs, making trade-offs. So it's also very specific to the place you are in the world. But yeah, back to the grind. And I also was seeking some purpose, right? Like I knew that I was not going to just be retired forever.
So tell me about Profasee. What does Profasee do?
So we, just like Uber surge pricing, or Uber surge pricing changes pricing dynamically based on a whole lot of signals and factors. We do this for e-commerce brands. So we believe, and I believe, that pricing shouldn't be static. Based on supply and demand, you can change pricing to maximize the intention that you have. So if you want to make more money, right, you can change pricing. It's not always increasing pricing. Sometimes it's decreasing pricing, and we can go into those specifics. But if you can change pricing to make a whole lot more money, and it's a lever that you can be pulling that nobody pulls.
Is there a specific TAM that you're focused on in it, or is this like anybody any seller in commerce can use? Like, how do you think about the market opportunity?
So it is. So I think this is actually an interesting one, right? Skubana, when we raised money, people are always concerned about the TAM. Now, when we were raising money for the seed round, nobody questioned our TAM. Or it was friends, family, people were just like believed in me and believed in the vision and wanted to risk it. For the Series A, we already were multi-channel, like similar to you mentioned Channel Advisor and
Yeah.
your sale, right? You were also multi-channel and working with different marketplaces and platforms, and we were the same. Right now, we're still in our early. We did a pre-seed, but we actually are now raising a seed round, and the feedback from investors. It's a different time, by the way, to raise
Yep.
money. I've never raised and actually in such a bad time in SaaS and e-commerce because things have changed significantly and things have gotten more compressed. But the feedback is, hey, Chad, you're only supporting Amazon right now. And I'm like, yeah, well, I'm only supporting Amazon, but the goal is to be multi-channel. The same way we did it with Skubana, just in a different market that we're attacking. So we'll start with Amazon, but we don't want to finish on Amazon. But yes, our TAM right now is very specific to Amazon's ecosystem. And then on top of that, you actually layer in more of a niche, which is private label D2C brands. So we don't support resellers, people that are competing for the buy box. We only support those that own the buy box and are competing for specific keywords.
How do you screen out the third-party sellers? They do like to eke their way through the doors.
Not if like you have good distribution control. As long as you have good distribution control, and most D2C brands do, unless they have like a wholesale channel, nobody's really coming in for the buy box. And Amazon's gotten pretty strict, more strict over the course of the past couple of years around that. So like if you search Bluetooth headphones, you'll see all these private label brands you've never heard of come up, and it's all price driven and it's review driven. And so you'll see all these different price points. And the question is, are you leaving money on the table? And the answer is there is billions of dollars being left on the table from all these brands because they just kind of pick their price willy nilly, pick it out of the wind, or market to market. They see their competition or they 5x their COGS, and that's how they come up with the price, and they just set it and they never change it. And we see that as incorrect and leaving a lot of money on the table.
It's interesting. It wasn't the intent of the episode, but you actually raised a topic that is a very real one right now, which is there is a lot of companies, a lot of point solutions, if you will, that are solving various problems around Amazon. And there's, I mentioned earlier, you're a part of this mafia. Like I think about some of the people who create these, whether it's Seller Locker or, the ticketing systems or the FBA optimizers or whatever they are. And then someone like a 3 Colts or a Carbon 6 comes along and buys the business for 5x EBITDA. And then you're like, that was a great experience. I'm going to start that all over again. But, it does seem that if you are Amazon only, there are risks. And so you can say, okay, but we're going to be multi-channel. But one of the inherent problems is that Amazon's level of maturity from a tech perspective, from a marketplace perspective, is like 2 or 3x Walmart, which is 2 or 3x all the others. So like, as a business, it can be very hard to optimize for those marketplaces given their lack of maturity. How are you thinking about solving that?
Well, I want to say Walmart is launching features rapidly. But yeah, so Amazon definitely is more sophisticated and has a head start for sure. But Walmart has APIs available that allow us to change price. I think Shein and Temu, especially if Shein goes public, that'll open up a pretty large opportunity for us because it's a price-driven platform. And there are ways that we can dynamically change price based on demand and based on different signals that happen. So that could be an interesting happenstance moment for us. And then of course, there's your traditional own commerce like Shopify and BigCommerce that we can be integrating with, and also having price parity or price deviations, but connecting all those platforms together so you can control pricing across those platforms. And there's like this other knock-on effect I just want to share with you, which is, well, twofold. One is like on Amazon, the reason why pricing is so hard on Amazon is that your price affects your ranking position. So nobody's actually been able to really figure out, and we've been able to do it, is how do you make as much money as possible, but not hurt your ranking, not hurt your discoverability on the platform. So it's something that it's a nuance that we've been able to figure out. And we've only been able to do that because we have such a head start, but we've also built these deep learning models where like our algorithm recognizes Amazon's algorithm. It's almost like, if we recognize two good people recognize each other on the street, we're like, oh, you're a good guy. So the same thing with the algorithms recognizing each other. I think that's an interesting input. And I was trying to think where I was going with that. Oh, and the second thing is that there's this new unlock that when you're starting a SaaS company, for those that are listening, when you're in the grind and you're seeing what's happening on the ground and talking to customers, there's new unlocks that happen over time where you're like, I didn't actually think about that. And so just one example of that is that we're changing pricing, and we realized that an Amazon business right now, 50% of their business is driven based on PPC. So there's actually a really interesting play around pricing. When traditionally, if you increase price, your demand goes down. So there's an inverse relationship organically. But what if you can actually pump more demand or impressions into a product using Amazon advertising? So while we're increasing price, now you're pumping more dollars to be more seen, and now you're actually unlocking a whole lot more contribution profit that you weren't. So that's a new thing that we've been working on lately, which is what we call harmonizing pricing and advertising together to unlock more profit dollars. But I think that's just an interesting learning for people that are in SaaS. They're like, wait, as you're walking the walk that nobody's walked before, you're going to discover other things on your path that you didn't know that were there that allow you to be like, whoa, and then the light bulb goes off. And then suddenly now you're down a new rabbit hole that actually is even a larger unlock than what you initially thought in the business.
And it can take a lot of investment and effort. And you might be able to, in that same time, get 2 hits inside the stadium and potentially make about the same money as a founder, especially when you think about taking on capital and having to give away more of the cap table and maybe some of the uncertainties that exist around commerce of the space. Like just how are you thinking about optimizing for outcome?
I would say that the idea, the intention with the business for me is if I help other people flourish, I will eventually be rewarded for it. And so my goal is not necessarily, of course, I want to have an exit. Do I want it to be
Mhm.
triple of what I had? Yeah, of course. That's, by the way, that's more ego than it is anything else. It's just like, hey, can I do it again? And can I do it better? Can I do better? Can I do bigger? That's inherently in me just because I'm a competitive person. But I think right now my premise that I'm operating from is if I can help people flourish, I will be rewarded for it, and that reward will happen with more, obviously more MRR and more customers wanting to
Mm.
find us, and eventually that will be a reward and a bigger outcome for the stakeholders, for the shareholders, and for my family.
I think the ultimate motivation for that question, Chad, is I should have articulated it better was again, going back to this pattern that I've seen in the space, which is a lot of really smart entrepreneurs creating businesses that solve a big problem. They get the business to a certain size, to a certain EBITDA. You've got EBITDA on your hat right there. I love EBITDA. And you sort of say, all right, I get to the business to a point where I can sell it and then I can go do the next thing. And now you have that experience of knowing what it's like to build a business over the course of 7 years and exit it. So do you go back and say, well, I could have done that in 4 years, probably made off just as well, and now I know how to optimize to do it so I can sort of rinse and repeat over and over again? Or like, is the journey just not as predetermined in your mind? You sort of have you sort of will know at the right time, but you're not being intentional about optimizing time in that way. I don't know if I articulated the question better in that sort of go around, but it's kind of what I'm digging at is like it seems like a pattern, but maybe it's not an intentional pattern.
The pattern of just going back in and
Building the business, building the business, selling the business, building the business, selling the business.
there's a pattern there. I always say that people always deviate back to their normal behaviors. And after I sold Skubana, I went off and did all these things and found all these cool hobbies. And I played chess and I took DJ lessons and I went on breathwork journeys and did a whole bunch of other awesome stuff. And now I'm back on the grind, grinding it away. And so
Yeah.
the pattern is certainly there. And I think that there's also maybe a tiny learning in that too. I think with Skubana, for example, I was working till 2 a.m. frequently. I had a lot of sleepless nights, hackathons, and the difference in this one, I'm being a lot more intentional about it, is that I'm not sacrificing myself in the same way. I'm not making the trade-offs, and I'm not willing to lose time with my 4.5-year-old Remy to to force this thing to work. And that's a learning that certainly I didn't have in the previous company. I was definitely overweight. I wasn't working out. I wasn't eating healthy. I wasn't taking care of myself. I wasn't doing breath work. I wasn't refining my skills and sharpening the sword the way that I am now. And I don't know if that precisely answers the.
Taking care of yourself as the first order priority and then building the business and right.
I mean, it's like, hey, family, myself, and the business. And I'm trying to, again, not make the same trade offs where I'm just like, hey, I'm not going to work out today. And you know what? I'm not going to see my son today. That's okay. I'll see him tomorrow. And I really try to time block and be really efficient with my time and not sacrifice the moments of family time and connection with myself and with the family.
What's your advice to Chad Rubin on day one of Skubana? The next Chad Rubin.
Oh, the next Chad Rubin that's building their Skubana? It's a great question. I mean, it could be that don't sacrifice yourself. But then the question is like, if I did sacrifice myself and it worked, maybe that's what's necessary to make it work. Or the question then is like, is it necessary to do those things, or was it all just in my head?
It is.
The
I think it raises the point that starting a business when you don't have a family, starting a SaaS company when you don't have a family or a lot of obligations, is that one time we're able to make all of the sacrifices you can make to ultimately build that business. I don't think it's to say that you couldn't do it once you have a family. It just makes it much harder. And I see that in a lot of founders is having pretty much complete control of all of your time, and the ability to make a lot of sacrifices allows you to put all of yourself into the building of that company.
Yeah, I would also just say that the Chad Rubin Skubana day one was, I always say I have a PhD, right? Poor, hungry, and driven. And I don't think I've actually lost those things at all. But I would say that I am understanding that with the value of my time is going up as my time on this planet is decreasing. And so I am thinking more about like what does an enriching life look like? And if you can not make those trade-offs or figure out how to work more efficiently, and now even AI allows you to even do that, I think that's important to me. It's very, very important to me. And yeah, I definitely feel like I'm working a lot more efficient. Like if you look at the way that we're scaling at Prophecy, for example, right now, and the mistakes that we are or we're not making, the way that we're scaling shows that I actually have some learnings I've integrated into the business. Like, oh, I've done this before. I'm a seasoned veteran at this point. So you can see those learnings taking place in the actual business that I'm running today.
I think that's a great place to land the episode.
And I was just to say one last thing is the one thing I didn't do at Skubana that I highly recommend people do is think about their mission and their core values. I know it sounds trite, these core values that people throw on a site, and a lot of times it is trite when they do that. But if you really think about what your values are, because businesses are a reflection, businesses are living organisms, right? They're people and product and processes that you put in place that are a reflection of you as a business owner and as a human being. And so one of the things I've done is I've taken core values that I use personally in my own business and I've implemented them into this business, and we hire and we fire against these core values. And they're not just these waxing trite statements, they're actually like meaningful things that we've baked into the business.
Chad Rubin, father, founder of multiple companies with multiple successful exits, and e-commerce mafioso. And I love what you said about core values. It's the way that you really drive clarity in a SaaS company is when you have core values that are super clear and gives everyone a North Star on which to operate. And with that, listeners, I want to thank you for taking time to listen into this episode of the Inorganic Podcast. If you enjoyed the conversation that I had today with Chad Rubin, please like the episode, subscribe, share, give us some feedback wherever you listen to these podcasts. And I just want to thank you so much for following me on this journey of the Inorganic Podcast. Until next time, keep scaling.